Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from the US, Mr. Gary A Bolles. Gary, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Gary is the chair for the future of work in the Singularity group. He's an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled The Next Rules of Work. He's the co-founder of SOCAP, the world's largest gathering of impact entrepreneurs and investors. And he's a former Silicon Valley executive, a serial entrepreneur, and the former editorial director for 6 technology publications. Gary, my goodness, you seem to have done it all. But let me start by asking you about your own amazing journey in brief.
Oh, I really appreciate that. So any attempt to try to show a linear path would be easily defeated. So instead, I'll say I have what's probably thought of as an advanced case of adult attention deficit. I'm fascinated by everything, but I was never all that interested in college. So I did a lot of odd jobs when I was young, and one of them was in the family business. My father wrote the world's enduring career manual, What Color Is Your Parachute? So I was trained as a career counselor at a very young age, and I learned pretty quickly that the message is you should do what you love. Yeah. And what I loved at the time was high tech. So you and I are exactly the same age. I moved to Silicon Valley in the early 80s. I've worn every hat you can wear, from executive to startup, and fell into writing magazines, technology magazines that sort of morphed into events and what we call initiatives with impact, focused on big challenging issues and relationships with a variety of very innovative networks around the world, one of which is Singularity University.
Amazing. So tell me a little bit, a lot of my viewers and listeners may not know about Singularity University and the Singularity Group. Tell me a little bit about Singularity and the work you do.
Well, SU is now about 13 years old. It was originally founded as a nonprofit by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis, whom your listeners might have heard of, both very successful authors. And their intention was to bring together a network of brainiacs, smart people on everything from next generation computing and artificial intelligence to next generation medicine and space. And those extraordinarily smart people would help people to understand the impact of exponential technologies and the opportunity to leverage them for positive change in the world. And I have the enviable role as the chair for the future of work in being able to sift out of those brilliant minds insights and ideas about the future of work, the future of learning, and the future of organization, all of which I've tried to infuse into my book, The Next Rules of Work.
Amazing. So let's now talk about your book, and then we'll talk about the future of work. You are the author of a book titled The Next Rules of Work, and I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go out, check out Mr. Gary Bolles' book on Amazon. I will go and check it out also. But tell me about your book.
So the basic premise was, I actually started writing it in January of 2020, when very few of us knew how the world was going to very soon dramatically change. Right. And what I'm fond of saying is, our managing partner and we had just produced a conference on the future of work a few months before. And I say, then it was theory, and then suddenly with the great reset of the global pandemic, it became practice. And so I really didn't actually issue the book until the late summer of 2021. So I was able to infuse a lot of the insights of a lot of the trends that we knew were already affecting our industries, our organizations, and our lives, and to give people strategies to be able to not just navigate this great reset of the pandemic, but to really have strategies for how they might actually apply it in their own work, and then some of the scenarios that might come about with this intersection of exponential technologies and work.
Amazing. You also talk of 3 possible scenarios. Could you talk about each of these?
So a lot of people, the rhetoric pre-pandemic was that robots and software are going to take our jobs. The pandemic gave us a 3-year hiatus for that. And now with the release of all these new artificial intelligence tools that your listeners might have seen and played with, we're back to this whole question of what's the impact of technology.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of think of it as three scenarios. There's one where we have this extraordinary wave of technology, and a whole bunch of jobs go away. There's another one where no, actually these new technologies, they empower a huge amount of new work. And then there's a scenario where both are true. We've got these exponential technologies that are chewing up a lot of human work, but then there's opportunity for others, and it's just not matched up. And it's the third scenario that I said, look, it's pretty likely that's the way it's going to go. There are going to be people who can adapt very quickly, develop new skills, leverage these tools. They're going to do great. It's the ones that are not prepared, that have not learned those skills and can't leverage those tools, and who work in companies that have this sort of zero-sum mindset that you just lay people off when you've suddenly made them redundant by technology. That is the most likely scenario.
Fascinating. But you also say that in your third scenario, there's likely to be a lot of work, but lots of underemployment.
So this is pretty inevitable with work markets. Is for your listeners, I just want to offer sort of a picture of sort of three things that comprise work. Work is basically a problem to be solved.
Correct.
How do we solve problems? We perform tasks. How do we perform tasks? We have human skills. So human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. Robots and software perform tasks. They don't take jobs. They just perform tasks.
Correct.
It's a human's decision if a job goes away. And we can make different decisions. It doesn't mean inevitably that these technologies will replace jobs. It actually is a far better scenario for all humans if we leverage these technologies to give people superpowers, to learn new skills rapidly, to solve new problems more effectively, to collaborate with each other around the world. And so if we do that right, there will be lots more employment. But if we don't do that right, then yes, there's going to be this mismatch, which actually exists in quite a number of markets already, just from the impact of the global pandemic.
Fascinating. So let's now talk about the future of work, and you chair the Future of Work group for Singularity. Let me start by asking you, Gary, what are some of the trends you see in the future of work as we move into 2023 and beyond?
So it's actually gratifying that I pointed to a number of these issues in the book, and it's still highly relevant.
Yeah.
So I'll just give you a couple of them. So the first is that we were already trending towards a world of more flexible work, and that's inevitable, especially with a highly active group of young people that are all coming up and will eventually run the world, and who are basically have grown up in an era where there's a tremendous amount of information about market opportunities. And in many markets where if they can't find the job that they want, they'll drive for Uber or for a delivery service for a while until they find the next one. And so it sort of changed the way a lot of work markets work.
Correct.
So that's the first one, is flexible work. And organizations need to be adapting themselves more to the needs of workers that want flexibility. The second is, inevitably, you're going to have more technology involved and infused into work. And the people and the organizations that understand how these technologies can affect their work and help them to do better work are going to be the ones that will be able to adapt on an ongoing basis. And the third is probably that, as we say at Singularity, exponential change, constant change, is not just the new normal, but the new abnormal. First, it's a virus, then it's, we'll make something up, a war that is affecting supply chains around the world. Correct. And then, let's make another thing up, artificial intelligence tools that suddenly come out of nowhere. We don't know what the next, what are called black swan events will be. We just know there will be one. And so if you match all these things together, exponential change is the new abnormal, the constant change in flexible work, and the infusion of these technologies into more and more work, those are pretty durable trends that are going to shape an awful lot of the way that work will likely be in the future.
Fascinating. But you also spoke a little bit about the pandemic and how the everything seems to have got redefined. Do you see a return to status quo?
So in the book, I show a picture of waves. The old rules of work, which is kind of where a lot of us, we sort of built them based on the industrial era, going to the same place and doing the same work. And then these sort of newer kinds of work activities, maybe experimenting with remote and distributed work. But then I call them the next rules, the ones that we've all been co-creating for the past couple of years of the pandemic. Now, there are, especially people of an older, beyond our age, that bungee cord back to the old rules. They want to see people. They only trust them if they see them working in the office and so on. Mr. Elon Musk fired half the people at Twitter and told the other half to work twice as hard, and they have to do it in the office. So I call that the old rules of work. And so there always will be organizations that follow the old rules. But there also will be a continuing trend towards organizations that are following what I call the next rules and are already baking in this mindset around flexible work. That will be more and more what the culture of the organization will be going forward.
Very interesting. It is also believed, Gary, that most high-value work will be cognitive in nature. How will technology change the workplace?
Technology has always changed the workplace from the time when we all worked on farms and the plow was invented. So technology has always influenced human work. It's always displaced some. Again, it doesn't do it automatically. Some human is making a decision that someone was displaced. And it's always created new opportunity. And so this is really what the opportunity is more and more of the technology solves really kind of basic activities that we've performed. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a robot doing your plumbing anytime soon. So even whether you think of that as high cognitive requirement or not, there's still going to be a lot of work that will require the versatility of a human to solve a lot of problems and won't necessarily be what we think of as informational work. But yes, especially in sort of the average workplace, a lot of the general tasks, remember, skills applied to tasks to solve problems, a lot of the general tasks will be increasingly automated. And what that means is that the opportunity is to use higher level problem solving skills to be able to solve new problems that software and robots won't be able to.
Very interesting. And we are all seeing an incredible move towards more and more of a digital economy, and with technologies like artificial intelligence and chat GPT. What is your view on how will the workplace change?
So think first of work roles, right? And the way we've constructed work roles and a certain set of problems to solve, right? And so what's really likely is that there will be a point of disruption, and that's going to be true in the workplace, and it's going to be true in the classroom, where just like with the calculator, with the internet, with Wikipedia, many people had to adjust. And then we all sort of accept, well, no, this is what the tool set is. And then we adapt our work and we build off of those tools. And, the internet was tremendously disruptive, for instance, to my former recovering journalist, my former industry, the media industry. We lost half of all the employment over a period of 25 years. But far more jobs were created in digital media. And so this is really likely to be the way that we're going to see that digital economy developing. Is we're going to go through a period of disruption for a while where we all sort of figure this out. And hopefully then enough people will learn how to use these tools and will be able to do that sort of higher level cognitive work. And there's still enough work for all.
Fascinating. The other part is now, with smart machines, metaverse, avatars, how should we as humans prepare for these incredibly new challenges? And I'm going to ask you this in two parts. One is the young, who have been born with a lot of, digital products around them. One are people of the older generation, which are people like, say, you and me.
So first off, the framing that I use in the book over and over again is that the way I believe humans are able to continually navigate disruptive change is what I call the three legs of the stool: mindset, skill set, and tool set. The mindset that we have, the way we approach our work, the way we approach other people, if we have a growth mindset and we're continually adapting, then we'll be able to navigate change. If we develop a 21st century skill set, and I talk in the book about, in English, it's called PACE, being problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy, then that's the skill set that is increasingly going to be required. And then the tool set, these are the AI tools that you and I are talking about. This is the virtual reality and other
Correct.
tool sets that we can apply to our work.
Mm.
And some are going to come really, really quickly, like these AI tools, and others like the metaverse. Yeah, that's a lot more
Yeah.
slow. But if we have the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set to be able to continually adapt, then we've got the operating system in place for us to be able to do it on an ongoing basis.
Very interesting. And I'd love to get your perspective on how does the older people adjust to these incredible new technologies that they're being confronted with?
So this is, again, something we can point to through different phases. There's always been old rules of work that have been continually workshopped into the next rules of work. When we all worked on farms, we all had to figure out this factory thing, right? And so no question, an older worker, you've solved a lot of problems, you've gotten to some level of prominence potentially within your organization.
Correct.
And then somebody like me comes along and says, nope, you got to become much more adaptive, and you got to develop this next skill set and mindset and so on. So the answer is, if each of us thinks of ourselves as a constantly growing and developing person, if each of us has a growth mindset, then even if a worker's been older and has been doing the same work for a good period of time, when along comes a virus and we have to change the way we work, along come these AI tools, and we have to have new strategies for how we leverage them. If you have things that you're continually passionate about, if you have a North Star or a Southern Cross that pulls you in what you most like to do, the kinds of work you like to do, the kinds of problems you like to solve, kind of skills you like to use, then you'll find yourself in a much better position to continually adapt.
Amazing. Thank you. My next question to you is, how will leaders need to change in an increasingly hybrid world?
So unfortunately, we've put people who lead, I don't use the word leader very often, just like I don't use the word manager or supervisor very often. We've put people who lead in a very difficult position. We've given them this industrial era hierarchy and structure, and then we've said, well, it's a world of continual change, you figure it out. So I believe we need to completely re-architect that role. And I call that the team guide. So there's a wonderful book my friend Esther Wojcicki wrote called Moonshots in Education. And she says teachers need to go from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side.
Wow.
Not the one with all the answers, but the one with all the best questions. So think instead of that manager or supervisor or leader changing their mindset, where what they're doing is they're empowering others to be problem solvers. They're empowering their team to dynamically bind around problems. And I believe more and more in the future, those team guides will judge themselves not on the problems that they solve, but on the problems that never reach their desk.
Interesting. The other aspect, Gary, that has always bound us together at the workplace is a culture. There are two different aspects of culture. One is strong cultures have always led to strong teams and great places and in good places to work. But how will culture need to evolve in a hybrid workplace, because now people are not even interacting with one another?
So first off, I want to, I'm often accused of being the word police, but I want to offer yet another way to think differently. I don't use the word culture very much. For two reasons. The first is that I believe that many people who lead organizations don't always have a really good Fitbit for culture. Like they don't have a finger on the pulse of the way the culture really operates. They misunderstand. If you have an organization of any size, you often don't have a consistent culture. You're a roll up. You've got a lot of different ways of thinking and acting. The second is I actually focus on mindset and behavior. So if culture is actually the total of all the behaviors of people in the organization, you're going to come at it with a different mindset as somebody who leads, and you're going to encourage behaviors that you believe will allow people to have more cohesion. That's really what people who lead, when they talk about culture and distributed organizations, are talking about, is cohesion, or what I call membership, like a connection between them. And the truth is, there are plenty of examples of organizations that have done a phenomenal job of building the connective tissue, even though they're highly distributed. If you look at an organization like Upwork, which is a work platform, they have about 2,000 workers. 75% of them are workers on their platform. That is, they're not standard employees. They've been contractors in some cases for up to 20 years, but they still think of themselves as being 100% members of that organization. Now think about your organization. Think about any organization where you are actually able to build that connective tissue between people. And it doesn't matter whether they're traditional employees, they're contractors. You have built this mindset, this consistent way of behaving. And the more you can actually encourage that throughout the organization, then that becomes the operating system, the way that people interact within the organization. And it doesn't matter whether they see each other on a daily basis or whether they're a highly distributed organization. They agree on all the behaviors that they most want to support.
Amazing. I have time for 3 more questions. My next question to you is that in an increasingly polarized world, do you see technology increasing the divide between the have and have not nations?
So technology taketh and technology giveth back. If you talk to Vint Cerf, one of the co-developers of the early internet protocols, Vint will be fond of saying, look, we put in place a way to try to connect as many humans on the planet as we possibly could. And so there's a great example where the infrastructure for connecting almost 5 billion people is in place. I mean, this was a fantasy 30 years ago, just a fantasy. So we can do this. You and I are across the world. We've never met in person. And yet here we can have this amazing conversation. And there's no time in human history when that has been possible before. So technology giveth, and that it helps us to be able to connect. Now, the challenge is when you look at the intersection of technology and economies and societies, and when you add those pieces together, there are combinations that are optimized for broad benefit for a lot of people. And there are, but especially in developing economies, the pieces aren't in place. That is, there isn't a lot of economic growth that's widely available to a lot of people. And so you get these accelerator effects where there's more and more money in a smaller and smaller number of hands. So the final chapter of my book, I actually talk about what I call inclusive capitalism. It's a different mindset about how we can recreate this intersection between economies and societies, and then how technology can actually be the fuel that allows us to be able to have more broad distribution of benefit. But you have to accept that the way we've done this so far is actually biased against the broad distribution of benefit, especially in developing economies. And we have to change those design heuristics to make it more positive for more people.
My next question to you is that what is your advice to companies who are in traditional businesses?
So think of it this way, in that if you already have existing customers that you're providing huge value to, again, we've got these waves, right? So you've got, I just did a talk on this topic 2 hours ago to a group in Australia, a group of CEOs in Australia. So you've got these customers that you've had around for a good period of time, and then you've got these more recent customers that you also are providing value to, and then you've got what my friend Charlene Lee calls in her book, Disruptive Mindset, your next customer, your future customer. So you'll always have these waves, and so as an organization, you have to think about how you retain the values that you've been able to prove in the marketplace and your achievements. But you also always have to have this view towards what I call not best practices, but next practices. How is it that you are continually encouraging the development inside the organization, the adoption of some of these really leading edge practices like becoming team guides and encouraging workers to dynamically bind around problems and having more of what I call a work net, a distributed workforce. If you're doing all of those things, you can keep on providing value to your existing customers, but you can start to put in place the process of continually adapting in a world of exponential change.
Amazing. And my last question to you, Gary, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. A lot of them are very, very young people. Most of them are under 34. Based on your incredible experience, all the work that you've done with the future of work, your book, The Next Rules of Work, I know it's going to be this is a difficult question, maybe an unfair question to ask you, but what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away? Especially given what an amazing conversation we've had today, but it's full of lessons.
So there's so much more we can explore, but I know our time is short. So I'm going to come back to the framing of mindset, skill set, and tool set, and offer a slightly different approach. So, and especially for a younger person, but for people your and my age as well.
Yeah.
So and even older.
Correct.
So first off, your mindset is how you approach situations and other people.
Yeah.
If you and your team, or however you are approaching the next problem you need to solve, you're going into a meeting or you're about to apply for a job. If you have the mindset, we've got this, we can do this, you are just as right as if your mindset says you can't. And so that positive mindset, that growth mindset, and especially if you've got that Southern Cross or North Star that I was talking about in your work, in your life.
Correct.
If you've got that mindset, you're so much better set up for a world of exponential change. The skill set, then there's 2 kinds of skills. There's bodies of knowledge and there's what I call flex skills, skills usable to a range of situations. And I mentioned PACE, problem solvers who are adaptive, with empathy. Develop that 21st century skill set. Become a PACE leader, so someone who leads with those PACE skills. And then finally, the tool set. How can you continually be curious about these tools? We have opened the aperture for creativity with so many of these tools. There's so many ways you can leverage these next generation tools to come at new problems with new eyes, to be able to solve problems in completely different ways. If you leverage that next generation mindset, develop this 21st century skill set, and you think of yourself as continually leveraging the tool set, then you put yourself in such a better place to be able to continually adapt in a world of exponential change.
What an amazing set of lessons. And on that note, Gary, and your 3 amazing lessons of mindset, skill set, and tool set: get the right mindset and approach the situation with a positive mindset, get the right skill set, develop 21st century skills, and third, develop the right tool set, which is be curious. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey, about your book, The Next Rules of Work. Thank you for talking to me. And I loved some of the examples you gave, but I love the one about technology, which is technology giveth and technology taketh. And there are so many more, pearls of wisdom in your entire conversation. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Ashutosh, thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.